Why are you here? To answer this question, we need to go back in time, 10 years ago, and follow this long path. 2013. Ukrainians across the country are rising up against the pro-Russian government, fighting for the right to be part of the European Union for its values and rights. 2014. And in our city there were protests in support of the European direction of development. I took part in them. We were attacked by armed supporters of the Russian way. But soon armed men began to appear in Ukrainian cities and seize government buildings. A hunt for all who supported Europe in Ukraine began. Many disappeared in the militants' basements. From that moment on, fear, despair, and hopelessness became my constant companions. May 2nd in Odessa, there is an armed clash. People are burned alive in a building. June 2nd, a fighter jet hit the city center during rush hour, killing many civilians. I was there 5 minutes ago. I walk home this way every day, and at this time, I will remember for the rest of my life the parts of human bodies scattered along the street and the people who were dying, but thought that they would get up and walk. July 17th. A Boeing returning to the Netherlands is shot down. 300 people were alive the entire time they were falling to the ground in free fall. The entire area was littered with the corpses of European citizens. The war began. Me, my mother, for cats and a parrot are hiding. Rocket explosions are thundering outside, and the whistle of shells flying past is heard over the roof of the house. We constantly hide under the beds and pray until we pass out from helplessness and fatigue. Electricity, internet, gas, communications, food, everything disappeared. Only the sounds of exploding shells and hunger remained. Due to hunger, the cat killed the parrot with whom she had always been friends. We risked our lives to get some food. We all got poisoned by the meat from the can and were sick for a long time. 2 cats don't survive. Half a year later, the front line goes further into the country. Life in Lugansk is gradually being restored. Electricity and food appear. Ukraine has erected a blockade around Donetsk and Lugansk, and the people are left alone with a new government, which considers people its property. Along with them came the most powerful and developed propaganda tools of our time, capable of effortlessly changing reality and people's consciousness. They convinced people that Ukraine was to blame for everything, that only fascists lived there. They blamed only Ukraine and Ukrainians for all the problems and destruction. They convinced people that people from the occupied territory were Russians because they spoke Russian. 2015. Due to stress and nerves, my grandmother's heart can't take it anymore and she dies. I have a mother and 2 cats left. I gather my courage and decide to try to break through to the territory of Ukraine to start a new life and take my relatives. The Ukrainian authorities stated that they had created the status of internally displaced persons specifically for refugees from the occupied territories. They provided housing and financial assistance. But for this, you need to obtain permission to leave the reservation. Having received permission to leave the reservation, I hugged my family and set out on my journey, with a heavy heart. I spent 12 hours crossing the border of the reservation. I was carefully searched and interrogated first by one side and then by the other. All this time, I could hear shell explosions and machine gun fire. I arrived in Mariupol and went to the Social Security Department to register as an internally displaced person. But there is no housing for internally displaced persons, and there never was. And in order to use state services and register as an internally displaced person, you have to find and rent housing yourself. After we survived, there was only money left for food and travel. In addition, the owner of the house must register me in his property. which in our country is done very rarely for strangers, especially for newcomers from the occupied territories. Attempts to find a rented room ended with looks of contempt and accusations of betrayal of the country, aiding in the start of the war, and separatism. I didn't know what to do. I was lost. All I could do was go back into the monster's mouth. Ukrainian media and public figures began to persecute Ukrainians from the occupied territories. They were called traitors and separatists for speaking Russian and blamed for the beginning of the war. At the same time, the Ukrainian government was doing business with the unrecognized Republic. They were buying coal from the Republic and supplying electricity and water to the occupied territory. At the same time, soldiers and people were dying because of the war. Nothing personal, just business. There wasn't a single street in the city that hadn't been hit by a rocket or shell. My city was turned into a concentration camp. The Ukrainian government called this zone Ordlo, which resembled the name of the land of orcs, and did everything to prevent people from escaping from there. Inside there were their own rules and laws and their own kings. I was desperate. I didn't know what to do. I was trying to find a place where I could go and take my relatives. I can't go to another country. For Ukrainians, migration has always been closed. You couldn't just go to Europe and start a new life. You had to get a visa and meet the criteria. If there was even the slightest suspicion that you wouldn't come back, you were denied a visa. To do this, you had to be very rich or a rare specialist and get a work visa. And then I came across articles about refugees. International protection. In order to save his life, a person can ask for help from the European Union. And if he passes all the checks and provides evidence, he will be protected and given a new future in the European Union. The European Union is guided by the principles of equality, human rights, tolerance, and does not tolerate racism and discrimination. Perhaps they will allow me to start a new life. 3 months later, having collected the crumbs of the remaining money, having gathered my courage into a fist, I again say goodbye to my family and set off on a long and dangerous journey to the other end of the country, to the border of the European Union. I immediately went to the Polish border, but due to the lack of a foreign passport, I was not even allowed to cross the border. I had to return to Lviv. The passport office refused to give me a foreign passport, since I had to be registered as an internally displaced person. I gave half of the money so that a private company could make me a passport, which would be ready in a month. I did not know where to live. There was almost no money left. I contacted Caritas and asked them for temporary housing in a church or monastery. But as soon as the clergy found out that I was from Lugansk, they immediately refused to accept me, saying that they did not want to see people from the occupied territories in the church, so as not to irritate the parishioners. At a charity that helps refugees from Crimea, I was received just as coldly and accused of the war being waged because of people like me. I found a very cheap hostel, ate food that the guests forgot. I tried to find a part-time job, but no one wanted to get involved with a man from the reservation. So a month passed and I got a passport. After what I had been through, I wanted to get to safety as quickly as possible, start a new life and take my relatives. I immediately went to the Polish border. I arrived at the border. I was so excited. It was only a little while before I could start living as a human being, without fear. My family and I would have a future. I learned the phrase, "Please help me. I am a refugee from occupied Lugansk" in Polish and said it to the border guard. I was taken to a place deep inside the border and I expected to be called to the immigration officer, to have my statement taken, my fingerprints taken. An hour later, I was taken to a room where I was seated on a chair and surrounded by 3 border guards. There was no immigration officer or translator in the room. My phone was taken away. The 4th officer sat on a chair and looked at the ceiling with a smile, giving me permission to speak. I was forced to speak Ukrainian. People speak Russian in the east of Ukraine. They started pressuring me by asking 2 questions in a circle.
Why not a work visa? Why don't you go and live in Kiev?
When I tried to answer one question, they immediately asked the second. When I started crying from the pressure, they said,
Everything is fine in Ukraine. You can live there.
Then I handed them sheets of paper with the text from the Geneva Convention on Human Rights and Refugees, previously translated into Polish. They looked at these sheets, laughed and said,
"Where did he get this?"
After that, they gave me a piece of paper filled out in Polish and ordered me to sign it. When I refused to sign anything without a migration officer and a translator, they immediately called security. The security grabbed me and took me outside. As we walked down the corridor, the border guards called me kurwa, bitch in Polish, and threatened to set dogs on me that would tear my ass if I came again. They took me to the Ukrainian side and gave me my things. At that time, entire buses with male refugees of Arab appearance were allowed to cross the border without any problems or checks. I am broken. I can't stop crying. I have no strength. I tried again the next day and the next, but this time they didn't even let me through the border. They just stamped my passport, no visa. I am back in the jaws of the beast, penniless and without strength. Pulling myself together, I decide to save up some money, get a biometric passport and fly to a European city where I will ask for help and protection. I hope that the incident on the Polish border was a misunderstanding. Although I was worried that the European Union officially stated that it considered everything in order and safe in Ukraine. I got a job as a journalist and graphic designer at a local newspaper of the Young Republic. I worked there for 3 years until the moment when in 2018 the management ordered everyone to be at work when the military of the Republic came to issue everyone mobilization sheets with military professions and referrals to a medical commission for military service. I quit and began preparing for another attempt to escape from hell. 2019, I'm ready to go, but my mother gets sick and I have to stay to take care of her. Then comes 2 years of COVID. We survive as best we can. We get COVID twice. We don't have vaccines or normal medicines. 2022 comes. Russia recognized the young republics and in honor of this, launched a shelling of the entire territory of Ukraine, beginning the seizure of new territories. The military kidnapped men right off the streets and put them on buses. They took half of all the men from factories and organizations, including the newspaper where I worked. They took people from their own homes, the disabled and the sick, everyone. The Republic closed the border and did not let the men out. They were used as meat shields to advance Russian troops and identify the positions of Ukrainian forces. I hide in my house. I hide in the basement. I try not to make noise so that no one knows I'm here. Deep in the night, I go to the toilet without light. My mother brings me food. I can't go anywhere. I'm trapped. I constantly think about what I will do when they come for me. Will I hide? Or will I run? Or will I break my leg? How can I surrender to Ukraine and not be shot? These thoughts drive me crazy, and I scream into the darkness, without making a sound, with all the strength I have, until I fall. 2 months pass. A stranger at work gives my mother the phone number of a man who can take me to Russia for money. We are afraid that this could be a trap and do not use the number. We hope that we will find a safer way. After a while, I heard that the European Union is creating Ukrainian temporary protection specifically for Ukrainian refugees. The European Union, wanting to help Ukrainians, creates a special status for them. All this is done in order to provide assistance to refugees from Ukraine as soon as possible. Ukrainians who are almost members of the European Union. The European Union states that it is doing this to the detriment of international refugees, providing Ukrainians with opportunities and privileges that no one else has had. They are given housing and unemployment benefits. However, Ukraine still did not release men, forcing them to participate in the war, which is not done with their men in countries such as Palestine, Syria, Afghanistan. In order to receive the status of temporary protection, those Ukrainians who managed to leave must provide evidence that they were on the territory of Ukraine after February 2022. And this news was a shock to me. I couldn't go outside, which meant I couldn't get official evidence. I had no bank cards or accounts, and any movement could be recorded by the military. I thought about getting a blood test at the hospital, which was an hour's walk away. They would give me a form with my name, the hospital address, and the date. I had to do something urgently, no matter what. If I managed to escape from here, then without this evidence everything would be in vain. I gather my strength and go out into the street with my mother. Every step is difficult. My legs are filled with lead from fear. We walk along narrow streets. I hide behind bushes and fences, while my mother goes ahead and checks the road. It was a long day. It's been 4 months since I've been hiding. One day I heard screams in the street and saw through the window how my neighbor was being taken away by the military. The military tells his relatives to pack their things and takes him straight to the front. I didn't have the best relationship with these neighbors. They knew I was home and I knew they would report me. I knew I was next. I have no choice. We call the phone number that the stranger gave us earlier. They take half of all the money I managed to save up during this time and pick me up early in the morning. All this time I feel delirious. We drive through fields and forests, avoiding Russian military checkpoints. Soon we arrive at a lonely checkpoint into Russia. This is a building the size of a kiosk for selling tickets. Here another driver picked me up and drove me to the nearest settlement in Russia. At the same time, men came to my house to find out where I was. I immediately go to the nearest airport. I'm afraid that there will be a search. I give half of the half that is left to buy a ticket to Turkey. I want to ask for help from the US Embassy. The next morning I fly out. The US Embassy refused to help me. I went to the Ukrainian Embassy to ask where I could go, where there were places for Ukrainians. But the Ukrainian Embassy said that they did not have such information. On the internet, I saw that Ireland was open for entry. I chose Ireland because I knew a little English. I gave everything I had for a ticket and flew. I had $50 left in my pocket. At the airport, I and 2 other Ukrainians were met. We waited for more people from Ukraine to arrive, but only 2 more showed up the entire night. The 5 of us were taken to the distribution point. There, they checked our proof that we had been to Ukraine and gave us yellow sheets insignia, which we had to carry with us at all times and present upon request. We were put into groups to be housed in monasteries and dormitories. For 5 days, we slept on chairs. The guy and I in our group were offered a room with 1 bed for 2-3 times. Soon, they found us a place in a small village with a population of 70 people. It was a wonderful place. Sea and mountains, fields and plains. There were no jobs or towns nearby, no schools, not even shops. There were good people and a good environment. I stayed there for a few months, but my health had gotten worse over the years, and the stress of late had accelerated the illness in my legs. Eventually, my joints became inflamed and the pain that had been regular before became even worse, and I couldn't walk without a crutch. Eventually, the mistress of the monastery sent me back to the distribution point. There I slept on chairs for 5 days until they found me a new place in the hostel. At the new place, I was immediately sent back because of my leg and because there were only bunk beds and places only on the 2nd floors. This time I spent 2 weeks on chairs. The distribution point workers ignored me and my request for painkillers, ignored my request to find a hostel near the hospital. They laughed and said that it was normal to travel 2 hours by train to see a doctor. Beds were only for asylum seekers, and when I asked why there were no beds for Ukrainians, the staff at the point answered, "Do you think you are better than asylum seekers?" The guards offered me to buy a night on a mattress for €20. It was a strange time. Unreal. Maybe it should be like this. Maybe these are the rules here. Maybe this is the meaning of equality, tolerance, and justice. I can't complain. I'm just a guest here. I have nowhere to go. To endure or return to the meat grinder. At night, a woman with a small child in her arms appeared on the chairs nearby. She was crying. She was denied Ukrainian temporary protection because she left Ukraine a couple of days before the war began. She cannot return because her house was occupied. In the morning, she left because she was asked to leave the territory. This territory is only for refugees. Then there were many Ukrainians who were denied refugee status for some reason. There were also those like me, who were from the occupied territories of Ukraine. They could not find evidence in advance. They tried to survive. Many could not believe that the bloody massacre throughout the country was not enough for Ukrainians to become refugees. Evidence was needed from each individual refugee. Nothing similar was demanded of refugees from Syria, Palestine, Afghanistan, as from Ukrainians. They were not given a special status separate from others, and this is strange. For Ukrainians, there was only Ukrainian protection. The employees of the refugee distribution point did not offer Ukrainians who did not receive Ukrainian temporary protection to go for international protection as an asylum seeker. Ukrainians who asked about the status of asylum seeker were told that international protection status is not given to Ukrainians fleeing war. International protection was only for residents of the Middle East and economic refugees. They found me a place in a huge hotel an hour outside of Dublin. It sounds like a dream. There are luxurious rooms with service, bathrooms for people with disabilities, a buffet dining room. Everything that was before seems like a bad dream and a misunderstanding. There are schools, a hospital, public transport nearby. It all seems unreal. I want to believe that my life is starting to get better and I will soon find peace. There are about 50 refugees under international protection living here, mostly middle-aged men from Georgia and Africa. And since March 2022, about 40 Ukrainians, mostly women with children and old people. At lunch, I met a guy from Georgia. He told me that anyone who wants to can apply for international protection. There is enough evidence of danger to life in words. He, like many other men here, came to earn money and for a better life. They travel and work illegally in Dublin. Many bought cars after 2 months in the country. His friends in other refugee settlements are provided with taxis at the state's expense 3 times a day, so that refugees do not have to walk 15 minutes to the bus stop. He plans to stay in the country. Even if he is denied a statue, he can appeal, and then in 3 years he will automatically receive status, and then he can get citizenship in his own house. All this seemed like fantasy and fiction. My life is slowly getting back on track. I have started treatment for my legs. I am taking courses and preparing to enroll in courses to get a specialty and look for a job. When I find a job, I will try to take my mother and cats here. I am seeing a therapist who is helping me cope with my post-traumatic stress and panic attacks. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can relax and calm down and start enjoying life. It was just a deceptive period of calm in the eye of the storm. The psychotherapist said that we can no longer meet, since the funds do not allocate funding for psychological assistance to Ukrainians. They can only allocate funds for assistance to international refugees. Soon on Christmas Eve before the weekend, all Ukrainians in this hotel are asked to pack up. The manager tells us that we must leave the hotel within 2 days, as it is necessary to make room for new refugees from Georgia, as there are a lot of Ukrainian refugees in the country and there is not enough space for refugees to live. We were immediately given new places to resettle in the south of the country in deserted villages. Families were divided, children, parents and old people were sent to completely different places, as the government did not care about Ukrainians and the new resettlement sheets indicated resident and a new destination. The sheets were distributed randomly to rooms. People lost everything: work, education, progress and treatment. Merry Christmas, dear Ukrainians. A family of 10 from Syria and 6 African students who were also under temporary Ukrainian protection are offered to switch to international protection so that they can stay in the hotel. Ukrainians are not offered this option. The Department of Equality ruled that this is fair. It also warned Ukrainians that all hotels are reserved for international refugees. All Ukrainians must leave them, and those who refuse will be deprived of accommodation. At the same time, although the Ukrainians left the hotels in 2022, according to the documents, they were not evicted and continue to pay from funds to support Ukrainians. A little time passed in the new place. I found a new doctor, went to courses. However, the social worker demands that I send out a CV, claiming that qualification or language courses are not progress in finding a job. At this time, my friends in international protection say that social workers, on the contrary, tell them to go to courses if they want to continue receiving unemployment benefits. At home, my cat dies of cancer. She was put to sleep. My mother ends up in intensive care due to an asthma attack. It was very difficult for her to call an ambulance during suffocation. She almost died. I am far away and could not help them. My family has become smaller. I decide that it is time to take my mother here. And then horror comes over me. Now Ukrainians cannot come with any documents confirming their identity. Now they need biometric documents. How is this possible? How can refugees wait under fire for up to 3 months while they make these documents for them? This is inhumane. My mother cannot make these documents. For this it is necessary to get from the occupied territory to Ukraine, through Russia and the European Union, but they will not let you into the European Union without biometric documents. Otherwise, you cannot get to Ukraine. This is terrible. At the same time, asylum seekers, economic refugees, may not have documents at all. The Department of Equality decides what is fair to do only for war refugees from Ukraine, social beds only for 3 months. All this is inhumane. I begin to conduct an investigation and surveys. I collect information. I talk to Ukrainians about their living conditions. I talk to international refugees and Irish nationalists. I write a collection of information, which I call Epicum in honor of the Irish Immigration Museum.
Unter der Mehrheit der Nationalitäten, die in diesem Staat unterdrückt werden, befindet sich auch 3,5 Millionen.
Using the Department of Equality, they also spread terror among the citizens of Ireland. They decide which small town will be populated by migrants, strangers without documents. The Department of Equality buys up real estate and hotel rooms, participating in schemes and machinations. Irish people who speak out against the destruction of their cities, traditions, and culture are branded fascists by the Department of Equality and the government. The government calls for open borders and multiculturalism, but at the same time claims that there are many Ukrainians. It gets to the point that only the Ukrainian embassy's website has a notice calling on Ukrainians fleeing the war not to go to Ireland, as there is no room for them. And at the same time, Ireland continues to evict Ukrainians to make room for new international refugees. The media has started a campaign against Ukrainians, presenting them as scammers. Women who go to the Polish border to meet their men, who are not allowed to leave Ukraine, are called welfare tourists. Their advancement is restricted, forcing them to return to Ukraine closer to their men. The media and social networks are making up fakes about Ukrainians, that they are given their own houses that they rent out, that Ukrainians have free travel, that their animals and cars are maintained at the expense of Irish taxpayers, that there is no war in Ukraine, that women and old people fleeing the war are lazy and do not want to go to work right now, after having just escaped from the missiles, that Ukrainians live in hotels, that Ukrainians are asking to take their unemployment benefits and give them to asylum seekers, that a lot of Ukrainians have arrived. By manipulating information, they present temporary protection as something supernatural, which refugees under international protection are deprived of. Ukrainians are used as a punching bag to demonstrate the fight against wrong refugees. Ukrainians endure, fearing that they will be deported back to the meat grinder of war. For every blow, they humbly say thank you with tears in their eyes. They inflate the figure of 100,000 Ukrainians, which is only the number of registered PPSN on a Ukrainian passport, a passport that began to be issued to all willing migrants from the Middle East, not taking into account how many Ukrainians left. The Ukrainian authorities, with the support of the European Union, are trying to return all men to the meat grinder of war, even those who have lived in Europe for decades. Ukraine has stopped issuing documents to men abroad, and the European Union is proposing ideas for deporting men. This has not happened in relation to Palestine, Syria, or Afghanistan, only in relation to Ukrainians. Ukrainian volunteer organizations, for grants and funding, say everything the Equality Department needs on behalf of the Ukrainian diaspora. Thanks to this, they received the consent of Ukrainians for a bed for 3 months, and unemployment benefit cuts, and for the lack of prospects. In turn, Ukrainian volunteer organizations arrange a monopoly in the information field and do not allow Ukrainians to go out into the streets and talk about the war, redirecting their energy to places where no one will see them. They are banned from holding political rallies. But Palestine is not banned from doing so. Ukrainian temporary protection is a concentration camp without walls. Yellow sheets are yellow stars, a sign of distinction and stigma that Jews had during the Second World War. People with the stigma of the yellow sheet have no right to anything, neither citizenship nor the future. They only have the right to work and hope that today they will not be thrown back to Ukraine like garbage. Ukrainian protection is like a condom, protecting a European country from assimilation of Ukrainians, with mechanisms to send Ukrainians back at any time. There is no place for Ukrainians in the European Union. At the same time, ignoring the war in Ukraine and the efforts of its soldiers to protect the European Union. The European Union continues business with Russia, with great caution, introducing sanctions so that the sanctions do not affect the business of partners or the common business of the European Union, but have an effect only on ordinary citizens of Russia. Russia has opened travel agencies throughout the Middle East to promote and help people come to Europe as refugees. Services include tickets and transport to the European border in Russia and Belarus, instructions on how to apply for asylum, and even new passports, for example Ukraine. In turn, the EU provides open borders for the agency's clients and does not check documents, provides hotel rooms, houses, and citizenship at the expense of the international budget for refugees, helping the money settle in the right places. Nothing personal, just business. International refugees are given a lot of time to assimilate. They are given time for language courses, help with their own housing, time for vocational courses, and job search. They are treated with patience and understanding. Ukrainians are not given time for anything. Frightened and confused people fleeing from war are immediately assigned to work, without being given a choice or time to understand the situation. For refusing to work, Ukrainians are reprimanded and accused of fraud. And if Ukrainians do not like these rules, they can return to the meat grinder. Ukrainians were allowed into the country temporarily, unlike other refugees, and they are not entitled to citizenship or assimilation. Albeit marked free, work sets you free. There is no future, you are trapped. There are no ways for a Ukrainian to stay and start a new life. There is a dead end ahead, and the fire of war is behind, and you can only wait for the inevitable. Only if you are a sought-after specialist, you can get a work visa and so they stay. The rest, women, children, old people, all those who are fleeing death and war, are not needed here. There is no place for Ukrainians in Europe. As soon as the flames of war die down a little, the yellow sheets will burn and Ukrainians will be forced to return. Panic attacks, cold sweat in the middle of the night, they have always been with me for 10 years. Even here they have not left me. I am waiting with horror for a new day, new laws and rules aimed only against Ukrainians, aimed not at integrating Ukrainians into society, but at worsening their lives, to force them to choose between the fire of war and a concentration camp with no prospects. To attract people's attention, I tried different ways. So I try through art too. Gallery of Fame of Equality and Justice.
When I became Tisha, I made it very clear I wanted two things in place when it came to migration: compassion and common sense. People are compassionate. It's not a nasty country. We're a welcoming country. We want to help. We want to be decent. We want to be humanitarian. But we also want to make sure there is common sense.
Simon Harris.
I think in 10 or 20 years' time, we'll look back on this and be very proud of what we've done as a country in welcoming so many people who've been fleeing war in Ukraine.
Leo Varadkar.
The world really gives equal attention to black and white lives. I need to be blunt and honest that the world is not treating the human race the same way. Some are more equal than others. And when I say this, it pains me, because I see it. Very difficult to accept, but it's happening. I hope the world comes back to its senses and treats all human life equally. As we speak, people are dying. I don't even know if that was taken seriously by the media.
Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus.
All are equal, but some are more equal than others.
George Orwell.
Just following orders.
Nazis said at the Nuremberg trials. Whose side are you on? One side is the side of humanity, decency, and human rights, and that the other side is on the road to fascism. That's why I'm here, because they couldn't kill me, they betrayed me, they refused me, they lied to me, they persecuted me. Now I'm here. I thought I came to a land of equality and justice, but I'm still surviving and fighting for life. There's only death behind me. I have nowhere to go back to, so I have to fight for the future. I'm trying to tell people what's going on, to show them what's hidden. That's how I came to write a book. That's how I came to create this brochure. That's how I came to create an art exhibition. And I'll come to something else, to everything, to be heard, seen, felt. That's why I'm here. I'm still here. Share this video. Spread the word. Thousands of innocent lives depend on it.